Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really stoked to be covering the Memphis Grizzlies and what has been a long-awaited offseason preview. We're back where we're going to cover multiple NBA teams this offseason and give previews to what they could look to accomplish in both the NBA draft and in free agency, giving us a good context of what these teams could look like going into next season. Now, if you're brand new to the channel, I'm sure a lot of Memphis Grizzlies fans are, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content. Really appreciate each and every one of you for watching this video. So now let's jump into that video preview here, looking at a season recap for this Memphis Grizzlies team. That's where we're going to start. It's important to know where these teams are at to figure out where we need to get them to go. Then we're also going to look at the NBA draft. Which draft picks did the Memphis Grizzlies have this year in both the first and second round? We'll also look at some targets that make sense for both rounds as well for the Grizzlies. We'll also look at their free agency situation. The Grizzlies are in a little bit of an interesting dilemma with their cap space. They have some needs on their roster, so we're going to evaluate some targets that could make some sense for them as well, even including some sign-in trades. And then ultimately, we'll conclude this video with my early outlook for this Grizzlies team next season. And let's get back to this past one. How did this season really inform us on this Grizzlies team? First of all, they were bad, 27-55 record, but they essentially had no Ja Morant. He played in only 9 games, did average 25 points a game in those 9. So Ja Morant looked like Ja Morant when he was on the floor. The bummer, though, was he just wasn't able to get on the floor from the beginning of the season with his suspension and then stay on the floor with his injury as well. So no Ja Morant definitely dampened the Grizzlies season, but I do think it gave way to allowing some of their other star players room to grow and develop. Desmond Bane's role had a significant increase in his numbers, showcased that with his increase in production as well. I think a lot of his self-creation took a step forward, which I think is going to be beneficial going into future years, as it did for Jaren Jackson Jr. as well. The two of them were allotted more opportunities to have the ball in their hands, create for themselves. I think Jaren Jackson Jr. took very important strides as a downhill finisher this year, kind of really maximizing his athleticism as a rim attacker a little bit more reliably, more consistently. So I think with that, Memphis going into next year when Ja Morant's back now have two players who are probably a little bit more well-versed with being able to create their own look in the half court in a variety of different ways. Desmond Bane off the bounce, Jaren Jackson Jr. getting to the rim a bit more. I think those two things are going to be extremely valuable for the overall context of Grizzlies basketball. They also made a very important Steven Adams trade, one that I did not see coming. They basically dumped Steven Adams' contract for a few second-round picks. Now, I do think the Memphis Grizzlies have a few things up their sleeve. They have extra draft picks to work with now, some extra draft capital. Maybe that comes into play in a sign-and trade this offseason. We'll see. They also got some young production from guys like Vince Williams, Gigi Jackson, that I think is very important to note. This team also has a few other players that honestly is pretty solid depth. You look at guys like Luke Kennard, obviously Marcus Smart didn't play a ton this year, hurt as well. This team just had so many injuries, but Smart is going to be a key contributor for this team next season, assuming he's back. And then looking at also Santi Aldama, I think took a meaningful step forward this year. The Grizzlies are pretty well established, and they have some really nice pieces that are going to be essential for them moving forward. And I think Vince Williams really solidified himself as an important wing contributor and most importantly point of attack defender for them. And then Gigi Jackson, obviously, oozing with potential. That's where a lot of people have excitement. I'm a little unsure on how he's going to fit into this team once Ja Morant's back, Desmond Bane is fully healthy. I'm not sure where Gigi Jackson's shots are going to reliably come from and how important he is to their rebuild or to their retooling, around Ja Morant. But I do think it is important to note that he had a pretty solid rookie season. So when we look at the NBA draft coming up here in 2024, they have 2 picks. So they have pick number 9 and pick number 57. Now, unfortunately for Memphis, they fell a couple of spots in the draft lottery. They were slated to have the 7th pick with decent odds to move up into the top 4. Unfortunately, luck was not on their side this time. I think they used it all up when they moved up to number 2 for Ja Morant, unfortunately. So they fall a couple of spots, but at pick 9, they can still address some of their needs, which first and foremost, I think center is at the top of the list. They do have Brandon Clark on roster, but after trading Steven Adams, I do think that they could still use a real anchor to their defense and someone who can help them offensively by getting on the offensive glass, being an elite screen setter, being someone who could work out of delay action in the NBA as a facilitator, hub of the offense type of big man. that's a huge need for them yet. You could also look at a big wing or forward type. That's something Memphis has been craving for a long time. You think back when they traded the 19th pick to move up, ended up selecting Zaire Williams. The guy that they gave up basically on draft night in that trade was Trey Murphy III. So honestly, if they could reverse engineer that and get Trey Murphy III on this roster, they'd probably be pretty well set going into next year. They're still missing, again, a center and a bigger wing. I think they could just use a little bit more size on their roster. And I also have best player available here. And I think one thing when I've looked at my mock drafts is when you're talking about pick number 9, it's a chance that maybe someone who doesn't fit Memphis falls to them at number 9, like a Rob Dillingham or maybe even a Nikola Topic. You never know what could happen on draft night. So, 9th overall, is it possible that you could see the Grizzlies just flat out go best player available? There's also rumors linking them to Devin Carter. I am not going to talk about him too much in this video, but he does fit kind of that grit and grind Memphis DNA and identity that the organization's had for so long. So you never want to rule anything out. Best player available is never a terrible decision. Drafting off of fit is sometimes misleading and honestly the wrong choice. But at the same time, with how good Memphis is as their overall roster, drafting for fit and addressing those needs like center and a big wing probably should be their first form of decision making. That should be their first line of decision making here, is addressing some of those flaws on the current roster. With some of these draft targets, there's some great options out there. Matas Buzelis stands out to me as a player I could really see fitting in Memphis as kind of that hybrid forward wing. You think about some of the picks they've spent on guys like David Roddy, Jake LaRavia. This is really the pinnacle version of those guys. Someone who can handle the basketball out in space, can create off the bounce for himself. He doesn't have the best first step, but he does have a pretty smooth jump shot. He likes his turnaround game, and standing at about 6'10", he offers pretty good positional size with some real ball handling skills to work with. So he's a big upside pick here in Matas Buzelis if they were to look at him. Could also see them going with someone in Tidjane Salaün, who's more of that traditional power forward role. He can stretch the floor a bit. He can put the ball on the deck a little bit. He's also extremely athletic, probably going to give you some rim protection as well as a weak side guy. Now the question is, does that fit what you need next to Jaren Jackson Jr.? Maybe not. Matas Buzelis is more of that wing forward type, whereas you're looking at Salaün, he's just more of a true forward. So is that what you want next to Jaren Jackson Jr.? What's your long-term goal next to Jaren Jackson Jr.? And then we get to the big answer that I think could really solve a lot of Memphis's flaws, and that is Donovan Clingan out of UConn. I think Clingan could be a tremendous get for the Grizzlies. At 7'2" without shoes on, he is a ginormous human being. Really offers a ton of rim protection. Really great rebounder as well. He sets fantastic screens. He's literally the definition of what they need there in Memphis, and drafting him in the first round would give you probably 7 to 8 good years of center play that is under a team-friendly-ish contract, assuming he doesn't get a huge, ginormous contract on a rookie extension down the road. I think Donovan Clingan is an extremely pro-ready player. I think you could play him playoff minutes day one of his NBA career. I think he is ready for that type of moment, very similar to Derek Lively in the way that I think his game is going to translate pretty smoothly to the NBA. Obviously, they're very different prospects. Lively wins more off of just sheer athleticism, whereas Clingan is more of a size and positioning prospect. But nonetheless, I think that overall, there's a lot to love with Clingan's game. I think he would be the perfect fit as a center in Memphis, and I do think that if they wanted to be aggressive and move up in the draft to ensure that they get him, I could not fault them for that decision. If they jump up to pick number 4, pick number 5, I think it would be well worth it. Who knows, maybe even pick 3 with the Houston Rockets. I can't rule anything out. Getting Donovan Clingan would be the perfect fit there for the Grizzlies moving forward. Now, let's say that maybe Clingan's off the board and they want to go with an upside grab as a wing. Getting one of those playmaking forward types in a Cody Williams does make some sense as well. He can get downhill, he finishes. One thing that I think is extremely undersold, people highlight the shooting consistency and the shooting volume, but they don't highlight the rim volume. He gets to the rim a ton, so I think he could be a really great fit in Memphis as another guy who could put pressure on the defense, attack closeouts, put the ball on the deck, and make plays off of that. A really versatile skill set and a player who I think is going to just have a very, very good career and really some real star potential, honestly, in Cody Williams if everything goes right in his development. That's a big if, but it is worth noting that maybe he has one of the highest ceilings in this class with a 7'1" wingspan, real rim gravity, rim pressure as a ball handler, someone who can make reads off of a live dribble. All impressive things for someone with good, solid positional size. And then here's where the best player available argument comes in with Rob Dillingham. If he's just available for you 9th overall, I just think you take him, knowing that he's probably going to be your long-term backup point guard after trading Tyus Jones. That is now a need for the Grizzlies. Obviously, they have Marcus Smart, but the way I look at it with Smart, Bane, and John Morant starting, it's, yes, a relatively smaller starting lineup, but upside off the bench, talent off the bench like Rob Dillingham doesn't come around very often, in my opinion. I have him very high on my own personal board. So I think taking him, even though it's not the positional need that they have on their roster right now, you can't really blame them if they did come to that conclusion if Dillingham was their 9th overall. Then looking at some second round options, I have a huge cast of guys here. Depending on what they do in the first round, if they go big man or if they go forward or if they even end up taking a best player available type of guard like Dillingham, there's a lot of options out here. As you can tell, there's going to be a good amount of shooting in the second round that I think the Grizzlies should look to grab. Now, there are some non-shooters in here. Let's start with some of those. Baba Miller from Florida State, as you can see far left on the screen, an impressive prospect from a size length standpoint. Took a big step forward in his second season with the Seminoles, converted on a way higher percentage of his shots and looks. Someone who's still, his offensive game is still developing, growing, but when it comes to versatility on the defensive end of the floor, he might be one of the most switchable, defensive-minded prospects in this class with his overall combination of athleticism, length, and size. Then you look on the far right, Dylan Jones, someone who is more of a pull-up jump shooter, someone who creates for himself, measured in a little bit worse at the combine than I think most people were hoping for. I believe 6'4.5" without shoes on. Now, he is a big, strong physical player, 245, 250-ish pounds. He's big, strong, built like a linebacker, and he's got a pretty impressive off-the-dribble game. He's able to create some offense, especially for himself. That's what he did a ton at Weber State. And I think coming into the NBA, if you scale his role down a bit, he could find even more success, but he is also very reliant on his pull-up jumper because I don't think he has the best first step. I think with his overall weight, not that he's out of shape, I just think since he's a heavier player, he doesn't have the most electric first step. He's not going to consistently blow by guys off the dribble, so that's also a big red flag with that I currently have on Dylan Jones is, does he get to the rim enough? Does he leverage his size and strength to getting all the way to the rack and finishing easier shots rather than having to go through traffic and through a body every single time? Then there's some other options here. Let's get to those shooters. Peyton Sandfort from Iowa definitely stands out as one. Looks like your prototypical NBA shooter. Then you have Cam Spencer from UConn, someone who makes a ton of winning plays. I think one thing about him, he's not a real 3-and-D prospect, but one thing he does really well that coaches love is he gets to loose basketballs. And it doesn't sound like a lot. It really doesn't, and it doesn't sound like a reason you should draft somebody, but those things really matter. Getting to 50-50 balls and winning possessions for your team really does go a long way in impacting who wins and loses basketball games, especially in the NBA. So someone like Cam Spencer, who his offensive game could get him on the floor as a floor spacer, if he gets to those 50-50 balls, he could really build out a nice career for himself. Alex Karaban, another UConn Husky here, I think makes a ton of sense. He's the second furthest to the left here on the graphic. I think Karaban really stands out to me as a 3-and-D plus prospect. I think he uses his athleticism well as a wing. Had a ton of blocks, especially in the NCAA tournament run, where UConn went on to win their second straight national title. Karaban was just making a bunch of plays on the defensive end of the floor, and then offensively, his primary skill set is his perimeter shooting, but I think he leverages his size and athleticism fairly well and makes himself a functional cutter, where if you're going to play out on him, extend off of him, he's going to look for cutting opportunities, find cutting angles that will get him easy shots at the rim, which I think is really beneficial for a role player. You could also look at someone like Cam Christie, who shot over 40% on threes as a true freshman for the Gophers. Honestly, a very impressive season for Cam Christie, who kind of started a little slower, started to build a lot of momentum for himself toward the end of the draft cycle and the actual season. And now going into the second round, I could see him as a legitimate option for teams looking to add a little bit of shooting, maybe some plus upside with his overall size, length, and athletic profile. There's still a lot of work to be done for him to reach any type of potential of being a real playoff contributor, but I do think that the groundwork is there for him to build off of some of his traits, which is again primarily the shooting, but then also some solid positional size, decent length to him, and obviously he's got some good pedigree. His brother's in the NBA right now in Max Christie. So not that that really matters, but sometimes GM scouts do look at it that way a little bit, even though I myself don't value that as much. The final player on the graphic here, Ihsan Almansa from G League Ignite, I do like as a prospect quite a bit. Has a ton of feel as a big man, and I think one thing is he really got his body conditioning right. Playing in the G League Ignite program, I think, was really beneficial for him. Being around physical trainers, being around pro level staff, I think was really important for him. Getting his body right coming into this year. Has a ton of feel, could be a fantastic short roll option. I think the big question with him is how frequently does he score the ball and how reliably does he score the ball? That's a big question yet at this point, because a lot of his playmaking field doesn't really get maximized if he's not a scoring threat. So there's still a lot of room to grow for him as kind of asserting himself as a finisher around the rim and beyond the three-point line. I think those are the two areas you're going to want to see him grow the most as a scorer. And I think with that growth, if he finds it, he could be a serviceable big man in some role for Memphis a few years down the road, which would be definitely worth a second-round pick. So when it comes to their NBA free agency situation, they're actually projected to have about negative $46 million in cap space. That means they're projected to be over the first apron, and their free agency moves would require a sign and trade. So they don't have a lot of flexibility this offseason when it comes to adding talent in the summer. They do, however, have some tradable contracts. Marcus Smart makes a little bit over $20 million. Luke Kennard making nearly $15 million. Very tradable contract. Brandon Clark making $12.5 million. Again, a very tradable contract. John Conchar and Zaire Williams, both two smaller contracts, but valuable contracts that I could see Memphis roping into deals to get another player back or to facilitate some type of sign and trade for a non-taxpayer mid-level exception type of player, making anywhere between $12 and $13 million. I could see Memphis trying to leverage some of their young pieces, some of their younger talent, and some of these contracts on the screen now into getting something done in free agency. And I have two big sign and trade targets that I could see the Grizzlies pursuing. The first one is center Nick Claxton from the Brooklyn Nets, and the second one is forward OG Anunoby of the New York Knicks. Let's start with Anunoby. I think he's the most important one to talk about here. The Knicks traded for him basically under the assumption he would re-sign. Now there's a report out that OG Anunoby will entertain free agent offers, and I think part of that is trying to maximize his leverage over New York, looking for the best extension he can get with the Knicks. I would be very, very shocked if OG Anunoby leaves the New York Knicks this offseason, and I would be especially shocked if he got signed and traded to the Memphis Grizzlies, because one thing about New York, I think what they're going to try and do is really leverage their winning culture that they have established, their winning situation, all of the talent that they have, and they're going to leverage that over some of the other teams that have cap space this offseason. Teams like Detroit aren't going to be able to offer that same type of winning atmosphere that the Knicks can. And if you facilitate a sign and trade, if you're New York, that means you're helping OG Anunoby go to a team that doesn't have cap space like the Memphis Grizzlies. And yes, while theoretically you can get something back for him by not entertaining sign and trade offers, you could also just really shut out the OG Anunoby market and force teams like the Memphis Grizzlies out. So ultimately, I do not think OG Anunoby will be a Memphis Grizzly. I wanted to touch on it in this video. Obviously, his free agency is going to be extremely important, but I would be shocked if he's playing anywhere other than New York next year. Nick Claxton, I also think, will be back in Brooklyn next year, although he is the pinnacle, premier, prime target here for the Memphis Grizzlies. He's got really strong touch around the rim, someone who I think can settle in on those 6 to 10 foot floaters. This gives Ja Morant unique spacing that honestly, at times in the past, he hasn't had a ton of. Someone who's capable of sitting in the pocket, putting up a little lefty floater, and getting that to drop, I think would be really valuable for him as a pick and roll partner offensively. But really the real benefit of having Nick Claxton is the potential of two Defensive Player of the Year candidates playing alongside each other in the front court. Jaren Jackson Jr., who is primarily best as a weak side rim protector, shot blocker type of big man, not a true anchor to a defense. Nick Claxton, I think, can be your anchor. He's a really strong, prolific rebounder of the basketball, but does a great job using his length and mobility to really challenge shots at and around the rim first and foremost, and then secondly off of that, does a great job. You can, especially with Jaren Jackson Jr. behind him potentially, I really think you could be a little bit more creative in your pick and roll defensive coverages. You could blitz more, you could form high walls, you could hedge and recover a little bit easier because you have another rim protector behind you. I think the Grizzlies, if they had two really talented rim protecting big men in Jaren Jackson Jr. and Nick Claxton, while their team would be very expensive, their top four specifically, they would be really, really, really tough to beat in a really good roster composition where size, clearly it still matters. If you want to beat Nikola Jokic, you need size. If you want to beat the Minnesota Timberwolves, you need size. So someone like Nick Claxton, somebody like Jaren Jackson Jr. forming kind of an alliance defensively, I think would be really tremendous for Memphis. And I also just do think Claxton would be a good fit with Ja Morant offensively as well. So when it comes to next season, what do I expect for this Memphis Grizzlies team? First of all, this team's going to be back to business. Okay, Ja Morant's going to be back, probably on his best behavior. And when you have number 12, you have a chance to really make some noise. This team is going to be, in my opinion, quite good going into next year because of Ja Morant first and foremost. And then off of that, having those other players take steps forward. I think Jaren Jackson Jr., Desmond Bane, showing that consistency and some of that improvement with their own shot creation is going to be vital for them alongside Ja Morant when Ja Morant's off the court. And even when Ja Morant is on the floor, having guys who are just a little bit more confident, a little bit more capable off the bounce themselves is going to be really huge while they slot back into their kind of normal usage, normal roles. You just have, I think, improved players at much needed positions, and especially offensively. And then defensively, this team's going to be great again. I think just with getting a center back, whoever that ends up being, if it's just Brandon Clark all season, or if they get a different center, whether that's through free agency or the draft, this team that already finished 12th this past year in defense, I think could have a real shot at being a top 5 defense once again. And I expect them to win a ton of games. You know, the West is going to be a bloodbath. I don't want to pigeonhole them into a top 4 seed or a top 6 seed yet because there's a lot of really great teams. But when you have Ja Morant healthy, you have Jaren Jackson Jr. protecting the paint, you have Desmond Bane shooting off of that, you have a really, really good formula to winning a bunch of regular season games. So the Grizzlies should be really, really good next year. I would be shocked if they're not a playoff team, and I think this team is going to take a huge stride forward back into relevancy again next season. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you did enjoy. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content. Grizzlies fans, let me know down in the comment section below who you want to get in the draft and in free agency. Had a lot of fun talking about the Memphis Grizzlies, guys. Again, appreciate each and every one of you, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.